The dog didn't have a name, not really. People called him different things, Rex, Shadow, Lucky, but none of those names ever stuck, and the dog never answered to any of them anyway. He simply existed, always in the same place. A dusty gas station on the edge of Highway 19, 5 miles outside the town of Maple Hollow. The station itself had changed owners 3 times over the years, but the dog remained constant, curled under the rusting ice chest during the day, sitting in silent vigil beside Pump 3 at night. He never barked, never growled, never strayed more than a few yards from the property. Truckers brought him scraps. Local kids tossed him bits of sandwich. The station manager left a metal bowl of water by the vending machines each morning. But no one ever touched him. Not once. If anyone got close, the dog would simply stand and move away. No aggression, no fear, just a quiet refusal. After a while, people stopped trying. The dog wasn't dangerous. He was just waiting. And he had been waiting a long, long time. 10 years, give or take. Nobody knew for sure. He showed up one summer evening, just after a thunderstorm, wet and trembling, but already wary. At first, the manager at the time had tried to chase him off. The dog didn't run, just stared, then lay down again beside the faded ice machine and closed his eyes. The next day he was still there. The day after that, too. Eventually, people accepted that he wasn't going anywhere. Someone put up a little sign next to the register that said, "Don't feed the dog." But it was more a formality than anything. Everyone did. Everyone knew. Over the years, stories started to spread. That the dog belonged to a trucker who died on the road. That he escaped from a military base upstate. That he was guarding something that no one else could see. The dog never offered answers. He only watched. And then, one dusty Thursday afternoon in late spring, everything changed. A silver pickup truck pulled into the station. Not unusual. People came and went all day. But as the engine idled and the driver stepped out, a man in his late 40s, lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes hidden behind dark glasses. The dog stood up. Not slow, not cautious, purposeful. The man didn't see him at first. He walked toward the pump, fished his wallet from his pocket. But then he stopped, turned, and stared. The two of them froze in place, man and dog, separated by 10 yards of cracked concrete and time. The wind shifted. Dust rolled across the lot. The dog took a step forward, then another, then sat. The man's face crumpled. He dropped the wallet. Knees buckled. He sank to the ground with both hands covering his mouth. "Sam?" he whispered. The dog no Sam stood, walked forward, slowly, carefully, as if every muscle remembered something the brain had spent years trying to forget. He stopped in front of the man, looked up, then sat again, and waited. The man reached out, shaking, fingers hovering inches above the fur. "I thought you were gone," he said. Sam leaned in. The touch was gentle, trembling, real. And for the first time in a decade, the dog closed his eyes and rested his head against someone's hand. He had been waiting, and now whoever he had waited for had come home. The man stayed there on the ground for a long time, one hand tangled in the thick fur around Sam's neck, the other trembling on his knee, his head bowed like someone at a graveside. Cars came and went. The pump beeped, unattended. But no one disturbed them. The cashier watched from the window, mouth slightly open, phone forgotten in her hand. She'd never seen the dog let anyone that close. Not once in the 7 years she'd worked there. But this wasn't just someone. This was someone he knew. Eventually, the man stood. Sam stood with him. They looked at each other like two parts of the same photograph, aged and faded but still whole. The man didn't say much as he filled the tank. Sam stood beside the truck, eyes never leaving him, tail still, body calm. When the gas cap clicked, the man leaned on the hood for a second, exhaled, and said quietly, "Let's go home." He opened the passenger door, and Sam jumped in without hesitation, like he'd been doing it every day of his life. The man climbed into the driver's seat, closed the door, and drove away. No one stopped him. No one could. They just watched. As the dust settled behind the truck and the sound of tires faded into the trees, the gas station felt different. Quieter. Like the ending of a song that had played too long. That night, the regulars noticed. The bowl by the vending machine stayed untouched. The space beside Pump 3 remained empty. The dog was gone. But for the man behind the wheel, the silence in the truck was heavy with everything he'd locked away. His name was Daniel McKay, former long-haul driver, once married, now alone. A man who had once had a dog named Sam. A dog that vanished without a trace on a spring night in another life. They'd stopped at a diner just off the highway near the state border. Sam had jumped out to stretch like always, but something spooked him. A truck backfiring. Or maybe a storm on the horizon. Daniel hadn't seen it happen. One moment Sam was beside him. The next he was gone. Daniel searched for days. Left posters. Talked to locals. But there was nothing. No sightings. No tracks. Just a hollow space in the world where Sam had once stood. And for 10 years that space never filled. Not with noise. Not with new places. Not with time. He had given up. Told himself it was better to stop hoping. But he never stopped looking. Not really. And now, somehow, impossibly, Sam was here. Older. Slower. But still Sam. As they drove, Daniel kept glancing over. Like he was afraid the dog might disappear again if he looked away too long. Sam stared back, eyes calm. Like he knew they both needed to believe this wasn't a dream. They drove past the town limits, through winding hills, until they reached a cabin tucked just off a gravel road. Daniel hadn't been back in years. Not since before the divorce. Not since before everything changed. The place was dusty, half covered in leaves and spiderwebs, but it was still his, still theirs. He opened the front door and stood aside. Sam entered without hesitation, walked the familiar path to the hearth, and curled into the same spot he'd claimed all those years ago. Daniel stood there, hands still on the knob, fighting back 100 emotions he didn't have words for. Grief, relief, guilt, and something that felt dangerously close to peace. He stepped inside, closed the door. That night he lit a fire, cooked the same meal he always made when Sam was around, chicken and rice, plain and warm. Sam ate slowly, carefully, then lay down again, letting out a long, soft sigh that filled the room like music. Daniel poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat beside him. "I don't know how you found your way back," he said, voice cracking. "But you did." Sam didn't move, just flicked an ear. "You waited for me?" Daniel whispered. "All that time. You waited." Sam's eyes closed. The fire crackled. And for the first time in a decade, Daniel slept through the night without dreaming of everything he'd lost. Daniel didn't leave the cabin for 3 days. He didn't answer his phone, didn't check email, didn't respond to the handful of friends who still tried every few months to pull him out of whatever shell he'd built around himself. He stayed inside, moving through the quiet rhythms of a life that had once made sense. Brewing coffee in the tin pot Sam used to stare at, chopping firewood out back while Sam lay in the grass nearby, driving into town only once to restock food and pick up an extra blanket for the dog's spot by the fire. No one recognized him in the store, but a teenager at the counter asked about the scarred shepherd sitting in the front seat of the truck. "That the ghost dog from the station?" she asked, chewing gum too loud. Daniel didn't answer, just nodded once and walked out. The question lingered, though. The ghost dog. That's what people had called him. It wasn't just a nickname, it was folklore. A dog who never aged, never left, never barked. Who waited for a decade at the edge of a road like a statue with a soul. Daniel hadn't believed it until he saw Sam sitting there like he'd never moved. But now, in the soft light of the cabin, watching him sleep, Daniel couldn't stop wondering. How had Sam survived? 10 years alone. No leash, no collar. Through winters and heat waves, storms and wildfires. Dogs didn't just do that. Not without help. And then there was the scar, an old one jagged above the back leg. He hadn't had that before. Daniel remembered everything about Sam. His markings. The way his tail curved left when he was relaxed. The way he'd make a huffing sound before barking. But the scar was new. Or rather, it had happened during the missing years. And Daniel realized something else. Sam didn't react to loud sounds anymore. Not the slamming of a cabinet. Not the thunder that rolled in that first night. Not even the sharp crack of firewood breaking under an axe. He had changed, adapted, learned something, or maybe unlearned something too. On the fourth day, Daniel took Sam for a drive. Not far, just down into the foothills, past the old ranger station and along the route they used to hike before everything broke apart. Sam perked up when the road curved near the river. He stood in the truck bed, tail low, ears forward, body tense. Not with fear, but alertness. Like he recognized it. Daniel parked and opened the door. "Want to see it again, old boy?" Sam jumped out slowly. Age had found him, but strength hadn't left. They followed the old trailhead through pine and fir until it opened onto the bluff. The view hadn't changed. Miles of trees, sky, the shimmer of river below. But Sam didn't look at the horizon. He was staring at a tree stump beside the overlook. An old one, weathered gray. Daniel followed, confused. Sam sniffed once, then sat beside it and looked back. Daniel walked over. The stump had been split by lightning years ago, blackened slightly at the edge. But something caught his eye, a mark on the bark. A scratch, no, a carving. 3 lines, shallow but deliberate. DM plus S equals infinity. Daniel swallowed hard. He remembered it now. He'd carved that with a pocket knife the summer before Sam vanished. A joke, a way of marking time, back when the world still made sense. Sam nudged the stump once, then laid down. Daniel crouched beside him. "You came back here?" he whispered. Sam didn't respond, but in his stillness, there was understanding. He hadn't just survived, he had returned. Again and again, like he was trying to remember, trying to hold on to what was real. And Daniel realized something colder, heavier. Sam had been looking for him just as much as Daniel had looked for Sam. But maybe Sam had also been trying to escape something. 10 years is too long for a dog to live alone. Too long for a body to last on scraps and kindness. Somewhere along the way, someone had helped him, or hurt him, and now Daniel needed to know which. Because dogs don't just wait a decade unless they have a reason. And this one had waited at the exact same pump, on the exact same slab of concrete, like a soldier standing guard over something no one else could see. And that meant Sam had a story, one Daniel hadn't heard yet, and he was finally ready to listen. Daniel couldn't sleep that night, not because of noise, not because of fear, but because the questions circling his mind had finally grown louder than the silence he'd lived with for years. Sam lay by the fire as always, breathing slow and steady, but Daniel could see it now. There was more behind those amber eyes than instinct. There was memory, maybe pain, maybe warning. He poured a cup of coffee at 3 a.m., stared out the window into the trees, and thought back to the days after Sam had gone missing. He remembered the posters, the desperate calls to animal control, the late-night walks down every back road in a 100-mile radius. He remembered sitting in this very cabin, fists clenched around nothing, waiting for a sound at the door that never came. But what he didn't remember, or maybe what he had buried too deep, was the man who worked at that gas station the year Sam disappeared. A mechanic, young, tattoos up both arms. He'd been there that night. Daniel had stopped for gas. Sam had jumped out of the cab like always, and Daniel went inside to pay. But something was off. The guy had been watching Sam too closely. "Good-looking shepherd," he'd said. "Trained." Daniel had laughed. "Smart as hell. Never needs a leash." Then he'd gone to grab a soda, and when he turned back around, Sam was gone. Just gone. No barking. No skidding paws. Just empty concrete and silence. And the mechanic had shrugged like nothing happened. "Probably ran off after a squirrel," he'd said. Daniel had driven around for hours, slept in the truck, called the police the next morning. But no one had seen anything. The mechanic was gone the next day. Moved. No forwarding address. Daniel hadn't thought about him since. Until now. The scar on Sam's leg. The fear of loud bangs. The way he refused to enter small, dark places like garages or sheds. Daniel felt his stomach twist. He grabbed a notebook and started writing everything he could remember. The guy's name, Josh something. Long hair. Maybe a bike jacket with patches. He wrote down every detail that surfaced, no matter how small. The next day, he went into town. Asked around at the diner, at the gas station, at the county clerk's office. Took hours. But finally, a name, Josh Meeker. Had a record. Bounced from job to job. Left town after getting into trouble with a customer over a stolen truck. And then one more detail surfaced. A retired sheriff's deputy at the cafe leaned in and said, "You know that dog of yours? He's been at that station a long time. Folks say he used to bark at the old garage out back. Growl like hell, but only at that one spot." Daniel's heart sank. What garage? The old one, where they used to change oil. It's locked up now. But back then, that was Meeker's Bay. Daniel drove back to the station. Sam sat calmly in the seat beside him, but his body tensed as they approached. The old garage was still there, padlocked and faded. Daniel got out, heart pounding. Sam followed. As they neared the door, Sam stiffened, tail low, ears forward. He growled, not loud, but deep, like a memory pulled from his gut. Daniel stood there for a moment, hand on the latch. Then he pulled. Locked. He walked around the back. Found a loose board in the siding. Peeled it away. The light inside was dim, but enough to see that the place hadn't been touched in years. Dust, tires, broken tools, and a box. A metal one, tucked in the corner, half covered in an old tarp. Daniel reached inside, opened it, and froze. Inside were dog tags. Not military. Identification tags. From shelters. From rescues. 4 or 5 of them. And photos. Printed from a cheap phone. All of dogs. Different breeds. Different ages. One of them, Sam. Years younger. Pinned by a chain around his neck. Muzzle clamped. Eyes wild. Daniel's knees buckled. He sat on the floor, clutching the photo, the box. Sam stood beside him. Quiet. Not afraid. Just waiting. Daniel whispered, "He used you." Sam didn't move. Daniel shook his head. "No. He broke you." The pain that flooded through him then was volcanic. A mix of guilt, rage, grief. He had left Sam behind, even if he hadn't meant to, and Sam had lived through hell, alone, until somehow, someway he made it back. Daniel stood slowly, eyes burning. "We're not done yet," he said. "He did this to others. We're gonna stop him." Sam looked up, ears perked, eyes locked, and for the first time since they reunited, he barked. One sharp, echoing sound. Not of fear, not of pain, of resolve. Daniel drove back to the cabin with the metal box strapped in the passenger seat and Sam lying silently in the back. The sky outside had dimmed to a bruised blue, and clouds hovered low on the horizon like they were waiting for permission to rain. But inside the truck, the silence was thicker than the air. Daniel's fingers gripped the wheel too tightly. His jaw ached from clenching. Every bump in the road rattled the box like it was filled with something still alive. He kept glancing back at Sam, who hadn't taken his eyes off the road since they left the garage. There was no question now. Sam hadn't just survived 10 years of being alone. He had survived something worse. Abuse, chains, darkness, and still, somehow, he'd found his way back to the only place that ever meant home. Daniel didn't know what kind of strength that took. He didn't think most people had it. By the time they reached the cabin, the wind had picked up. Pines outside bent and whispered. Daniel carried the box inside and set it on the table like it might bite. Then he opened it again, slower this time. Inside were more photos than he'd seen before. Folded beneath the first layer were Polaroids, some grainy, some overexposed. All of dogs. Muzzled, tethered, terrified. He found a receipt for a shipment of veterinary sedatives, an old syringe, and a rag that still smelled faintly of something chemical. He had no doubt now this wasn't a mechanic storage box. It was evidence. The box of a man who hurt animals for profit. Or pleasure. Or worse. Daniel called Julia, a former state trooper who had moved out west, but still had contacts in the local force. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, but he didn't hesitate. "I need to report something," he said. He sent her photos, a copy of the receipt, a recording of his statement. By the end of the call, she was already forwarding it to an investigator in the county. "You realize this might take time," she warned. "The guy's gone. No address. No records since he left the state." Daniel looked at Sam, then back at the box. "He won't run far. Not from this." He hung up, sat in silence. Sam sat beside the fireplace, eyes closed but body alert, like he could sense the tension in the room but was holding it quietly, so Daniel didn't have to. Later that night, after the fire had gone out and the last page of his notes had been filled, Daniel took a walk through the trees behind the cabin. Sam followed, padding silently beside him. The moon was full, casting pale light through the canopy. They reached the overlook again, the one where Daniel had carved their names all those years ago. The stump was still there. So was the memory. But now something had shifted. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out the old photo of Sam, the one from the box. He looked at it, at the scared, broken dog in chains, and then down at the real Sam sitting by his feet. "You're not that dog anymore," he whispered. "You never were." Sam blinked slowly, sat taller. Daniel pulled a knife from his pocket. Not out of fear, but for something simpler. He stepped to the stump and added one more line to the carving, "Home." Sam didn't move, but Daniel saw it. A slow rise and fall of his chest, a calmness settling into his frame that hadn't been there before, like a weight had finally been lifted. They walked back in silence. The cabin was warm when they returned. Daniel poured a glass of water. Sam curled on the rug. Outside, the wind finally died down. Inside, for the first time in 10 years, nothing needed to be said. Because some stories are told in silence. Some pain is carried in fur and bone and scars. And some reunions are not just about finding what was lost, but proving that love, real love, waits as long as it takes. 3 weeks later, Daniel got a call at sunrise. It was Julia. Her voice was tight, clipped, no wasted words. "They found him," she said. "Meeker." Daniel didn't move at first, just let the name settle over him like dust. "Where?" "Montana. Arrested for trespassing. They ran him through the system and hit the alert I placed. He's in holding. Transferring to county jail tomorrow." Daniel's knuckles whitened around the phone. "Will they charge him?" "They're building a case now. Your photos, the box, your testimony, they're enough to start. But it'll take time. I want to testify." "You should." A pause. Then, "How's the dog?" Daniel looked over. Sam was lying in his usual spot by the hearth, but his ears had lifted at the sound of Julia's voice. He didn't move, he rarely did anymore, but his eyes met Daniel's, calm and certain. "He's still here," Daniel said, "still watching everything." After the call, Daniel sat in silence for a while. He didn't feel triumphant, not relieved, just still, like the engine of something long idling had finally been shut off. The past wasn't undone. It never would be, but it had stopped growing. The rot had been cut away, and now what remained could breathe again. The next day, he and Sam drove. Not far, just to the shelter where he'd once made dozens of calls, desperate for news, and where, somehow, Sam had never been found. The staff there had heard the story by now. The gas station ghost dog that finally went home. They offered Daniel coffee, asked to take a photo. He agreed, but only if Sam was in it. The picture was simple. Daniel kneeling beside the dog, one hand resting gently on Sam's shoulder, both of them looking at the camera. Nothing posed, nothing forced, just two old friends still together. The photo made the rounds online. People from all over the country sent letters. Some wrote about pets they'd lost. Others said they cried. A few just sent photos of their own dogs with notes that said things like, "He waited too." But none of that mattered to Daniel. What mattered was the way Sam changed after that. Not suddenly, but noticeably. He slept deeper, wagged his tail more. On one walk, he even chased a squirrel for 3 whole seconds before realizing he didn't quite have the knees for it anymore. And Daniel laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in over a decade. He started writing down everything. Not for a book. Not for closure. Just so he'd never forget. The road trips. The hikes. The time Sam had learned how to open the glove box just to steal beef jerky. The nights they'd spent in silence because silence was all they needed. He wrote the whole story. From the day Sam vanished to the day he came back. He titled it simply, The Dog Who Waited. One evening, weeks later, a ranger came to the door. Said he'd been asked to look at a parcel of land behind the old gas station. A local group wanted to put a memorial there for dogs, for loyalty, for the idea that waiting wasn't just about time but about love. Daniel didn't say anything. He just nodded. Sam was lying in the sun, eyes closed, ears twitching at the breeze. He's kind of a legend now, the ranger said. He should be, Daniel replied. That night, Daniel lit a fire and sat beside Sam as he had every night since they'd been reunited. He placed the old photo, the one from the box where Sam looked scared and caged, into the flames, watched it curl and vanish. Then he leaned back, sipped his tea, and watched the sky fade from orange to blue to black. Sam shifted once, stretched, and rested his head on Daniel's foot. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to, because in that moment, and every one that came after, everything had already been said. The leaves began to change by the end of September. The hills around the cabin turned to fire. Burnt orange, crimson, gold, and the air smelled of wood smoke and pine. Sam moved slower now. He didn't chase shadows or watch the road like he used to. Instead, he spent his days on the porch, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed as if drifting between this world and another. Daniel knew the time was close. Dogs didn't live forever, especially not ones who had already outlived so much. But still, he wasn't ready. How could he be? Sam had been the thread that tied his past to the present, the proof that love could outlast loss, that memory could survive even when everything else was taken. One morning, as the first frost painted the windows silver, Daniel awoke before the sun and found Sam already outside, sitting on the edge of the porch, staring at the tree line. The sky behind him was pale and pink, the first light of day just beginning to spill over the ridge. Daniel stepped out quietly, wrapped in an old wool blanket, and sat beside him. For a while, neither moved. The forest was still. The wind, soft. Then, without turning, Daniel whispered, "You waited 10 years for me." A pause. His voice cracked. "So I'll wait for you, however long it takes." Sam let out a low breath and rested his head against Daniel's leg. They stayed like that for a long time, man and dog, past and present, heart and soul. That evening, when the sun dipped below the trees and the stars blinked into view one by one, Sam passed away peacefully in his sleep. No pain, no fear, just quiet, just stillness. Daniel buried him beneath the old oak behind the cabin, the same tree where Sam used to dig shallow holes just to hide sticks. He carved a small stone himself. No name, just a single word. Loyal. The next day he received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a simple card with one sentence inside. Some wait to be found. Others wait to come home. Daniel smiled, taped it to the wall above the hearth. And then, as the fire cracked gently behind him, he sat in his chair with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders and whispered into the quiet, "Good boy, Sam. You can rest now." And in the stillness that followed, Daniel swore he could feel it. One last thump of a tail brushing against his feet, like a goodbye.